Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's so much fun to see all of you in person. Yay. This is great. And great to see all of our folks on Zoom as well. We are very excited. This is our first in-person Science Cafe of 2025 of the summer season. So thank you all for coming out tonight. And we are really, really excited to kick off this summer season with our friends from Landscape of Change. So some of you may recall that we've had periodic updates from Raney and Catherine and Jennifer over the last few years as they have launched this collaborative project to really kind of monitor and just look at the impact of the changing climate on our coastal communities. And so this is always one of our favorite events of the year when we get to hear a little update on some of the great work that these amazing ladies have been up to. And so I'm just going to quickly turn things over to them right away so that we can get started, because I think they've got some great information to share with all of us. And then at the end, we really want to have an open discussion and talk a bit about some ways that all of you can participate in this great project and move it forward. So with that, I want to just welcome Raney Bench, who I think many of you know is the executive director of the Mount Desert Historical Society. Island. I was trying to figure out, is there an island in there or is there not an island in there? And next to her is Catherine Schmidt, who is the science communication specialist at the Schoodic Institute. And then Jennifer Boer, who is an artist and photographer here on MDI, who many of you may be familiar with her beautiful works inspired by the intertidal zone around the island and elsewhere. So the three of them have come up with, I think, a really wonderful way of talking about the impacts of climate change on the community, documenting a lot of what we're seeing. You know, those of you who have experienced some of the intense storms that we've been experiencing on a regular basis can understand that at least where I live, I'm seeing, you know, levels of sea rise that I've never seen before, and I won't tell you how many years, but anyway, it's fun to, you know, think about what does that actually look like? How do we think about that? How do we document that? And then how do we talk about it as a community in terms of what the future holds and how we want to navigate that? So that's really what we're all about tonight. We're going to have a brief sort of presentation. So we're going to have a couple of different speakers, and then we're going to just open it up for questions and conversations. And so those of you online, if you have questions as you're watching the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat and we will call them out and make sure that everyone can hear them. So with that, welcome and thank you all so much.
Thanks, Jerry. Great, thank you guys for being here. Do you need me to start the presentation or is it getting started? Sorry, never had like someone do tech support like that before. Amazing. All right, so I'm Raney Bench, the Executive Director for the Mount Desert Island Historical Society. And I just want to give a huge thanks to Jerry and everyone here at the team at the BioLab for continuing to invite us back for this opportunity to share about the climate change work that we've been embarking on and continue to do for 4 years now. And this is our 4th Science Cafe. So I'm just curious, is it 5th? Holy cow. I'm curious from a show of hands, how many of you have been with us through any of our previous presentations about Landscape of Change and the climate change program?
Oh, wow.
Okay, just a few, and sorry online, I can't see those, but it just helps me gauge how much of an introduction I should give to the overall project itself that we are going to be talking about tonight. So, Landscape of Change is an umbrella title for a collaborative project that we launched in 2021, where I had an opportunity to be working with some historical documents that really detailed some very fine scientific information and observations about the climate specifically, but also different observations for the land and species populations around MDI. And Catherine Schmidt had been working with that same information in what's called the Champlain Society notebooks, which were compiled between 1880 and 1890 every single summer. So they're this really unique and amazing documented record of the island. And so I asked what I thought was kind of a simple question, which is, can you use these historical records and documentation and any other kinds of things in our archives to be able to understand what's happening in the world around us today? Do these things have relevance to us now? And Catherine said a resounding yes, absolutely. And as a result, it's really unveiled this incredible collaborative partnership that is fluid and ever-changing as we focus on different aspects of how we can understand changes to the MDI shorelines and environment. So we have been working together with various partners since 2021. Initially, the BioLab came on as one of our first partners to talk a little bit about this. They helped us with the logo and some of our initial launching, and then be able to share the scientific research and community engagement, which is part of their mission and their values, as well as ours. We also have Schoodic Institute, Acadia National Park, Climate to Thrive, College of the Atlantic. We've been working with high school students, and lots of different partners sort of come and go as we shift focus over the years. And so under this umbrella, where we started to look through these historic records, we were pulling out some of the most salient data that we could find to compare to different observations taken throughout the past. So we have the initial journals from the 1880s to 1890. In addition to that, we had studies that we were referencing from the 1920s, the Proctor collection, which was adjacent here to the MDI Biolab, collections from the 50s. And so we're able to build longer data sets to be able to understand change over time and how dynamic that change might look in a small space like MDI. So for example, our first studies, which you can find summarized in the report here on the left, both on Schoodic Institute's website and the MDI Historical Societies, we looked at bird and pollinator populations, seawater temperature, and climate observations. And so we were taking those four really pretty complete data sets. We added about 40 years of climate records to the state of Maine's climate records from these historic documents. But then we also started to look at how that compared to change in the environment of MDI over time. So as these different projects have morphed over the years, we've brought in additional partners, including Maine Coast Heritage Trust, the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. We've been really active with local island schools to be able to take the scientific information and then start translating it into different ways that people can engage and understand. So science has a lot to say about climate change and the ways that our environment has been changing around us over time. They also look for ways to understand and predict what could be happening in the future based on the evidence surrounding us today, and as I said, expanding those data sets longer and longer into the past to be able to track change over time. And so there's lots of ways that people can access that, but not everybody learns in the same way. We all have different learning styles. And so for some people, the science isn't accessible to them, or it might have different kinds of barriers that might be cultural or political or just language or basic, not even basic, but the complexity of your scientific knowledge and understanding varies from person to person. But at the MDI Historical Society, we are interpreters. And so we are used to taking really complicated data and distilling it down to the most salient pieces of information that people could take with them to be able to learn. And hopefully we're meeting people where they are and inspiring them to take their curiosity one step further. And then we have artists like Jen Boer, who takes that even further and tries to create visual interpretations of what this information means so that we have visceral emotional reactions and responses to information. So not only can we reach new audiences, we can reach our existing audiences in new ways through this work. So using historical records, we, as I said, the first year we looked at those 4 predictive indicators to understand how the dynamics of the populations of bird and pollinators might be changing or the climate might be changing on MDI. And then we engaged with Jen to kind of communicate changes that we had seen visually in a relatively short period of time in Jen's time on MDI. That was her parameters, to create 8 original artworks, 3 of which are on display on the banners in the lobby as you walked in. So I would encourage you to take a few minutes as you leave to check those out. Jen did extensive scientific research to be able to graph and then pull those graphs into an artistic statement that, again, draws people in at various levels. And so that was our year 2 project. And then year 3, we thought we'd start talking about sea level rise. And we started working with students at the high school to look at king tides. And it happened to be that the high school students that we were working with had king tides during their science class. It was like very convenient. So we could go out on the landscape and actually observe king tides in action with the students. And so we pulled in these historic records that are in the collections of the MDI Historical Society. And we said, okay, so where can we find old newspaper accounts or diaries or photos of different high tide events on MDI? Where were those happening? And can we identify those predictable vulnerable spaces where we're seeing tidal events take place? Are they still happening in the same places today, or are they happening in new places or additional places? And so what are we seeing with a king tide? A king tide is, and you always define it better than I do, but it is a predicted highest high tide of the year. And they will show us what our average high tides are going to be in the future, right? So we can sort of get a real-time picture of what advancing tides look like on the landscape. And so we're out on the landscape with these kids, and then we're talking about, okay, so do you see how this makes these different parts of our infrastructure vulnerable? Or we're looking at ghost forests where the saltwater intrusion has been killing off trees as it's advancing. And what happens if a king tide and a storm surge happen at the same time? And they're like, what? That's not going to happen. And then it was December 2024 or 2023, and it did happen. And so I went out, they were on Christmas break, and I went out and like took pictures of all the places that we had gone during the king tides to show them, like, here's what that would look like 3 feet. I think they were higher than the average high tide, which is the predicted high tide in 2100. So, so we were able to really like show these real-time interactions using historic records, modern observations, and scientific predictions. And so our goal is to, oops, I went backwards, understand the scope, scale, and speed of what's happening on the island. And so, as I said, we can compare historic records. This is seawall, just sort of little funsies, because it's not controversy at all. Just showing how it's changed in some ways over time and in some ways not at all. And then we really want to take all of that incredible information that's being gathered and communicate it to the public, get people excited, engaged, help them understand it. So this is at the Family Science Night here at the Bio Lab. Last year or 2 years ago, we have a tendency to come and participate here as well. So we're trying to take, again, that really complicated issue of sea level rise and how it manifests on the island and just engage people with where they're at and what they're seeing. So we have these fantastic maps of MDI. I have one out here again on the entryway. And we have these little stickers, and we just ask people at all these different events, where did you see, where have you seen, where are you worried about high tides in our area and on our island? And so we take these all over the place, we mark them on the back of the map, like which event they were at, and then we keep them in the collections of the Historical Society to be able to show, depending on which community you're in, your answers are going to be really different. And depending if we just had a king tide, you might be thinking differently, or after the storms. And so it shows us, again, gives us an insight into what people are thinking about, what they're looking at, and what they're aware of. But it also is a really simple way to increase awareness of what's happening around us. This is available for all ages, for all backgrounds, and all interests, to meet people where they are and ignite their curiosity. So community engagement looks like a lot of different things as part of this project. We host community suppers, which we did in Southwest Harbor with the Gulf of Maine Research Institute and Scudic and Jen, among other partners, and invited people to just come and talk to us over dinner and talk to each other about what they're worried about, things that they're thinking about. And for me, I had one of the most transformational moments in this process and of this project when a fisherman told me, they don't care about the high tides. There's always storms. There's always excuses for why the roads are washing out or these places are things are happening. We have a long history of storms and severe weather. What they're going to notice is when the low tide is higher. And all of a sudden, that simple observation changes how we communicate about what we're observing and what matters, because now we can meet people where they are. So those kind of community informal suppers are really important to us. This is a guided walk that we led during a king tide event at the Oceanarium, where we have an installation there that people can go and look at. We have lectures like we do here and public programs. We have all presented at professional conferences. We advise, we write articles, we work with schools, and we leave marks on the landscape. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen.
See, is my mic on? So my part of this project is really simple. I make things visible. I didn't say it was easy, just simple. So, and also, that's what artists do. We're walking around going, hey, check this out. This is really cool. Lately, I'm doing a lot of, you guys might want to look at this. This is kind of terrifying. But always, I'm like this. Look at this thing that I've noticed, and I want you to put your attention toward. And so for coastlines in particular, we're directing your attention to locally specific effects of sea level rise by marking them directly on the affected parts of the island.
I didn't have luck with that. I just used the button on the keyboard. Oh, you did.
Thank you. So when Raney said, let's do something about sea level rise, I went, okay. And I decided that we needed a way to mark locations in a way that was instantly recognizable so that as you moved around the island, like when you saw one sign, you would understand that it related to all of the others that you might have noticed. And it would communicate to you the effect of sea level rise in that particular place where you were standing at the time. So I made a logo. It's an abstracted profile of the island joined to an ancient symbol of water. And then I drew all over the walls at the oceanarium in chalk. This is just chalk, deciding sort of how big it needed to be visible. Things need to be a lot bigger in the landscape to be seen. And also trying to figure out what colors to use, like what actually would stand out in a natural landscape. And then, oh, I should say thank you to the Oceanarium folks. They have been amazing partners in this project pretty much from the beginning, letting us experiment with signage and communication and engagement. So after all that, I made a stencil. And this was our first installation. This is June 2023 at the Oceanarium. And Catherine is marking there the projected sea level for 2100 on the gift shop wall. And you can see this has some implications for the gift shop. I think it was after this that they moved all of their electrical 4 feet off the ground. It still got swamped, but that's a different story. Okay, so our next installation was the Kelly Farm in Bernard. This is October of 2023, and we partnered with Maine Coast Heritage Trust. This was our first attempt at freestanding signs, and we thought it went pretty well. The volunteers came, painted, and installed them out in the cove. And then that winter, we got some major storms, and the signs did their job as visible markers of change. Sorry. So the data set that we had been using at the time had been published in 2019, right? I think.
2022.
Okay. But the photo on the right was taken after the February 2024 storm. So not that long after that data had been published. And that is seaweed draped over the sign because it was swamped in the storm surge. And, we talk about the rate of change can increase and is increasing. And this for me was kind of this was a surprise. I didn't realize that it was moving quite this fast. And Catherine will talk in a bit about how we're gathering data as part of this project to keep updating those projections. So after those storms, we decided we needed to include flood levels from the storm surges. And we needed to differentiate the past levels from projections for the future. And we eventually settled on white for past floods and storm surge and blue for projected levels. This is a project that has been evolving. It changes every year. We notice things, we change the project to accompany them. And so by our second year, I really wanted to bring this project directly into the schools. Problem was, I have no experience with teaching, particularly in a formal educational setting. These are some of the organizations that helped me out with training, with resources, with grants. All of them are aimed at integrating education about climate change into larger communities that students are part of. And they all have different approaches. And if you're curious about what they offer, I'd love to talk to you guys later about those. We partnered with Tanya Prentice at the Tremont School to install signs at the school's kayak launch with her 7th and 8th grade science classes in May last year. Oh, whoops. Sorry, I skipped. Oh my God. If that's the only thing I mess up, we're going to be doing really well. Also, hi, Dad. So we've done 6 installations so far. The ones marked in red show the storm heights, and the ones in blue are projections. Now, I would personally like to see these signs in every community on the island. I would like to put one at every boat launch, every public dock, at every point where the roads are going to flood, and on any endangered building or landmark where we can get permission. I want to ring the island with these signs so we can literally see what the tide line is going to be. Okay, then we partnered with Tanya at the Tremont School. This is her 7th and 8th grade science classes in May of 2024. And last year, as Raney showed you before, we came here to Family Science Night and we did an installation in the Cove. Last October, we installed signs on private property with permission with Ruth Poland's high school environmental studies class. And then back at the Oceanarium, we updated our installation at the end of August. The boat on the right had been washed by the storm surge into the woods. You can just see in the background there, the salt marsh, the water from the salt marsh way back there. That's how far that boat got washed up. The storm surge went at least 40 feet into the woods there. And we went back there on a perfectly calm, windless day in September. This is not storm surge. This is just a regular old king tide with no wind. And we watched it slowly rise, fill the marsh, and spill over into the pathways. And just talking to you guys about this, I'm literally getting goosebumps because it was the most eerie thing. Dead silence, and that tide just kept rising right up. On the right is a map of our installations at the Oceanarium. There's a really pretty path that kind of leads out along the marsh and back along the inlet. And if you follow it, it's a lovely walk and you'll see a lot of our installations. But maybe don't go during king tide. So I'm going to leave you with one last set of images from the Oceanarium. This is on the left. This is low tide in August. And then on the right is king tide just a few weeks later. And Catherine, you're up. Oh.
Thank you, Jen and Raney, for such a good introduction to this work together. Thanks to all of you for being here. I know you have a lot of choices on an early summer evening and appreciate you all being here and look forward to your questions. So I get to play scientist in this collaboration. Schoodic Institute at Acadia National Park is the park's primary partner in science and education. And so we do a lot of science across all ecosystems, including in the intertidal zone. We do have a lot of low tide science, including a mudflat mapping project that just started this year. So you'll be hearing a lot more about sea level rise and low tide, but we'll stay with high tide for now. And in previous presentations, I've presented charts of sea level rise and projections, and I'm happy to talk about those if you have questions in the discussion. But I kind of wanted to talk tonight about the data and what are we doing with these observations. So when we started, I started kind of restarted some high tide monitoring through Schoodic Institute in 2019 because we had a separate project with the National Park Service and some researchers at the University of Rhode Island to study and model nor'easter storms with sea level rise. So there's a lot of research on hurricanes, but not a lot of research on nor'easters, which historically have been the most damaging storms in this region. And so as part of that, we started paying more attention to high tides for reasons that Raney explained. They can help show us the future sea levels. And so we use ANAC data Again, this is supported by the Mount Desert Island Biological Lab. So just an example of how this collaboration works and how we all support each other. And we ask people to contribute observations during high tides and during storms, and using Anecdata, which is a public citizen science platform. There was a pre-existing project on there. We didn't create a new project. We just started using an existing Gulf of Maine king tides project. And so the map and all the dots are just different observations. It's free to upload. You just upload a photo with the date, the time, and the weather, and you can add notes with it. So when the storms happened in early 2024, Raney and we were all sort of online frantically gathering photos from Facebook and social media and news sources, and put out a call immediately for people to share their storm photos with us. A lot of those came in via email, just people sending us things. And so afterwards, I had about 500 photos from this, just from the 2 January storms in March 2024. And one of the things that we're doing with those is working with those modelers, those researchers at University of Rhode Island, to help ground truth their models. So if they can see where it actually flooded at what time, they can look at what their model said the water was going to do and just check it and see if it's correct. And so it's been helping those researchers, but also the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, who's doing work with communities on the island, and they've been using Anecdata to verify their models. So one of the things we did with the students last fall was have them help us upload observations to Anecdata, because once it's in that platform, it's really easy for the researchers to just download the whole data set, which is available to anyone who wants to use it. So here's the students trying to figure out the locations of all of these photos and using historic maps to help us upload. So it's a lot of data from the storms. I didn't end up, they're not all on there, but there's a lot on there. So you can go in and explore and look at different places that you're interested in around the island. Here's just an example of the kinds of photos that were submitted to us. And then, so all of that helped inform the model. So the University of Rhode Island researchers, there's another collaborator, Peter Stempel at Penn State University. And he's a landscape architect, and it's called a 3D visualization. He actually has a whole tree library from Acadia, so he can like place the right species of trees in there. And this is very recent. This is just from a couple weeks ago, so it's not refined, but it's just an example. So this is the model of the storm at Thompson Island. So where the road crosses onto Mount Desert Island, and that's Thompson Island in the upper left. And so this is, and the depth. So yellow is 1 foot, shading to darker green is deeper water. Just an example. There's also some printouts of different visualizations out in the lobby to look at. And then here is that same storm with 3 feet of sea level rise added onto it. So this is, we were having a conversation before looking at some of the visualizations in the lobby. So this is modeled. This is not just based on elevation of the landscape, but actually the actual storm modeled with the winds and the currents and things like that. So this is the, in 2100, what that storm would have done to the road crossing island. That research has done, so it's looking at national parks and wildlife refuges across the Northeast. We have these visualizations, and then my role has really been communication and engagement. And I have been learning a lot from this project. And so this project I was able to just jump into it because I was already doing this work and supposed to be doing engagement. And so it really enabled us to be a strong partner in this work. And we had science to lean on. So the researchers have been really great about providing charts, and anything I asked them for, they've been able to give us some really unique data visualizations and charts, including, I just got one today of the wind direction. So there's a lot of discussion in the storms about the winds coming out of the southeast. And so to be able to visualize that is really helpful. And so I've been doing a lot of communicating. And I just want to point out the validity of this process. So this was a visualization of the oceanarium, which I said, we're working with the oceanarium. I need a visualization. And this was actually from before the storms. So this is from December 2023, the nor'easter. And this is what the landscape architect gave me, which is actually wrong, because we know from the oceanarium that there was 8 inches of water in the parking lot. And so because they were out there observing and taking pictures, I was able to give that information to the researchers and improve the science. So we're going to shift now into kind of talking about what's next for this work. And I'm just going to start with what's next for the science. And what's next for me, and I think our role in this project, in this place in particular, is more focus on natural landforms. So there has understandably and rightfully been a lot of attention and investment in infrastructure, but there's also a lot of natural infrastructure that protects our shoreline. And so things like windthrow, all of the trees, there were hundreds of trees that were knocked down in the storms last year. And these are mature spruce and fir that are going to take 50 years to get that big again. So what is happening to these forests as we get more frequent storms? What is happening to our beaches? So this is Sand Beach after the March storm. So there was erosion after January, and then the March storm came through and there was a major landslide at the beach. How is the beach going to continue to change over time and recover, if at all? How are the responses that people are taking, like building seawalls? So I've been tracking the shoreline stabilization permit applications submitted to the state of Maine, which are, every week there's a handful of permits for another 100 feet of riprap going in along the coastline. And when you armor the shoreline on either end of that armoring, it erodes worse. And so it's not thinking like an island to just put a seawall in front of your property. And what about those seawalls? So we have natural seawalls that do protect our landscape, and they kind of function like a sand dune, but they're made of cobbles and they roll over. This is a seawall between Wonderland and Ship Harbor that rolled over into the wetland behind it. How are these going to change over time? Monitoring them, monitoring salt marshes, and then especially monitoring coastal heritage sites along the shore. So this is the Glidden Shell Mound that's actually on the Damariscotta River, but it's a photo to give you a sense for what these Wabanaki heritage sites look like and how they are eroding because of sea level rise, but also how Wabanaki people have knowledge of how to live with rising seas. So my call for all of you is to keep monitoring, and I hope I've instilled some confidence that it really does matter, and your data are important and useful. We have some big tides coming up in October and November, and as always, when storms are happening, we appreciate any photos that you can take. And then we want to keep marking. So Jen already said we want to cover the island, right? We want anywhere you go, if you're crossing the water or along the shore, we want you to see that coastline stencil. So we want to keep marking. Talk to us if you have a location you'd like to mark.
I'll conclude and facilitate some additional discussion, which is that we want part of this project and part of our goal in starting all of this climate work 5 years ago is that we really want to think like an island. MDI is 108 square miles, and the ocean doesn't care that there are 4 municipalities on it. It is going to respond to our shorelines as a whole, and we only have one access point to and from this island that all of us, regardless of our municipalities, have to rely on. So if we can understand and have common understanding of what is happening, what our opportunities are for resilience and planning, then we can have common solutions that are more important, or not more important, but more effective and more meaningful. And so we're not going to be, hopefully, pushing our problems onto our neighbors, as the seawall example showed. And so How do we come together? We've been having the same kind of discussion related to other topical situations going on MDI, especially related to housing, where we look at the different ways that we've come together in the past. So we have worked together as an island before, and oftentimes the high school consolidation is pointed to as the first time MDI identified itself as MDI rather than the individual towns, but came together over multiple decades to solve a common problem that required thinking like an island. The fire of 1947 also bonded people together on the island as they had to come together for evacuations, shelters, recovering, and eventually housing. And then we also have examples with land conservation where people were united in order to protect something that they love, and they learned to be able to find those common values that are able to extend beyond the differences or disagreements that we have to be able to forge solutions. But we've also learned through this work that there are some really hard lessons if you don't come together, because again, the ocean's not going to care. It's going to keep advancing regardless of whether we agree or disagree. And history can teach us about that too, like in the Auto Wars, where each individual town made a decision about whether to or not to allow cars, and that affected other towns. And in the absence of a combined island-wide decision, outside forces made the decision for us. And that will happen again too. Or housing, the debates that we're having now, or sustainable growth. So all of those things can also divide us if we can't find those values that unite us and bring us together. So how do you get involved? How do you do at something, anything, right? So that you can be part of this process and feel like you're engaged in what we're working on. So there's lots of ways, and this is always a growing list, which is really exciting. And so as I start to talk a little bit about these last couple things that you could do or that maybe are preventing you from doing things, I would love you to think about, like, what is it that is a hurdle or an obstacle for you? And what would you need to overcome that hurdle or that obstacle to be able to get more involved? And we're going to have kind of a discussion around those two questions. So what you can do to be involved and to be engaged is you can do a stencil. So we have the stencils here that we will loan out to you with instructions on how to know where to make a mark. Your mark doesn't have to be permanent. It could be on a board. It could use chalk. But if you're curious about a space on the island of what it's going to look like or what's going to happen, we can give you instructions on how to go to at a high tide mark and measure to where the future high tide will be and what those measurements should look like. So you could do a stencil. Or you could join a committee. Every single town has a sustainability committee focused on environmental issues or on sustainability planning for the different every town. So you could be involved with that. You could get involved with a nonprofit. There's any number of nonprofits on this island doing this work, including A Climate to Thrive. Gulf of Maine Research Institute is oftentimes looking for volunteers. SCUDIC, MDI Historical Society, whatever. You can share your images or your documents. You can find that place that you love, and for low tides, super low tides, or super high tides, go out and take a picture of it and send it to us. And keep that documentation rolling or coming in. Or you can share from your own collections in your own family past, your own family's history here on the island. If you have different observations, measurements, pictures, whatever, we are still continuing and will continue to develop that archive and that database. And so then what are those things that are preventing you? So often people talk to us about fear of not knowing enough to be able to talk to other people about it. I am a historian. My degree is Native American sovereignty, federal Indian law. But I just spent like a half an hour talking to you about sea level rise because I also live on an island and I care deeply about this space. And I have these incredible partners who tell me things and correct me when I'm wrong and have inspired me to be able to get more involved. And then we have this fear that you don't believe in climate change. And if I talk to you about it, you're going to be like, what? That's not real. But we have a perception problem in this country where we know from studies that we think 30% of the population understands that climate change is real and 70% think it's a hoax. The actual inverse is true. the vast majority of people understand that climate change is real. And so you don't really have to be scared to talk to someone about it. And you don't have to get in a fight about it. You can ask, what have you seen that's different from when you were a kid? What birds are here that weren't here before? Turkeys, let me tell you, or what's missing? What do you love? What was that bird you loved or that flower you loved and it's not here anymore? And so then you can find this commonality to be able to talk together. So don't let fear stop you, right? Lack of information. This is a lot of data and it's a ton of information and it can be really scary, but hopefully you can be inspired to find different partners. We have exhibitions, different articles that you can access. Time, right? Okay, well that's like hard to argue with because everybody has a hard time with finding enough time in their days, but we all make choices and priorities. And so I just joined Southwest Harbor's Sustainability Committee and Environmental Group because I needed to like put my money where my mouth was, right? And have to take more action. Sometimes we have other priorities or we're uncertain how to really get involved. So hopefully this list has helped create some inspiration for you. And so I just am going to wrap up. We've got about 15 minutes for like questions and answers, but also I would love to hear from you and from online. How do we think like an island? How do we tap into those things that we value together and hold that sacred as we think about the things that are going to have to change to be able to maintain those values? What do we save and how do we help? So just, I'm going to open it back up.
So we're going to just sit and have a conversation, I think, with all of you. And if you think you're going to get out of this without participating, we're going to close the door until you all do. No, just kidding. There were so many great tidbits there, and I think so much to talk about and touch on. So I think our challenge is going to be squeeze it all in. But I want to just, number one, thank you all for the work that you do and for the great presentation and engaging all of us in really understanding kind of what's at stake and how important it is that we all participate in this process. So thank you very much for that. It's always really engaging every time I hear the update. Raney, do you have a particular order in which you want to tackle? You want to just first open it up for general questions and then maybe get to some of those issues that you were referencing in your remarks? So I do want to open it up for questions. I know I saw a little bit of activity in the chat, so there may be some questions from online folks. Anybody have anything that you really are curious? Oh yeah, lots of, awesome. How about right here? Yeah.
In the water was like so powerful. I'm wondering, like, we kind of all know what that means. There's probably some people when they look at those are like, what does this mean? I was wondering, is there like a QR code
Yeah.
attached to them or
I thought the
like
same
a video
thing.
kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for those online, in case you couldn't hear, the question was whether or not it's possible to put a QR code on the stencil so that people can find out more information. And I'm just going to tag onto your great question because I was thinking as you show that image of Trenton and of the causeway, that would be such a great place to pepper a lot of those stencils with more information because you get all these visitors that are coming to the island. But it strikes me, and that's been such a, I've just noticed the death of the trees from the salt infiltration has been really dramatic over the last couple of years there.
Yeah, we have plans for Thompson Island, so stay tuned.
Okay.
There are big plans for Thompson Island. So more on that in the fall. It's definitely a location where we're going to be increasing communication and engagement around sea level rise and erosion. And then I think for the stencils, they're meant, and I'll let Jen respond about, they're meant to prompt curiosity. And that's the beauty of working with the partners. So it's when visitors to Maine Coast Heritage Trust Kelly Farm Preserve go and ask the person on staff, what are those signs? And then it starts a conversation. So rather, right, and people at the Oceanarium, they have the information. And they will be putting stories on their website. And there is information. There's a page. I didn't actually bring the handouts. There is a QR code. If you just search coastlines on Scudic Institute's website, you can get the information, including all the locations where they are, and we keep it updated. But we really just want people to have a conversation and to talk to the host locations about what the stencils mean. Jen, I don't know if you want to say anything.
Yeah, the stencils are intended to spark curiosity. They're not meant to be didactic.
Mhm.
People tend to tune that out, including me. You hand me a handout about sea level rise and you're like, yeah, whatever. Well, no, maybe not quite, not quite that bad. But you know, if you hit people with that much information, it kind of tends to go in a flow. But if you hand them something that they need to figure out, they're like, this is interesting, but you don't hand them the information that goes with it, then it's going to stick a little more.
And I would just conclude by saying the infrastructure to support this project
Yes.
is a challenge. Like, we don't get funded for this at all. So this comes out of MDI Historical Society's tiny annual operating budget. It comes out of Catherine's budget for Scudic. And then we pay Jen whatever we can, but it's never what she deserves. And so I think if we had opportunities to get better funding, we would be able to do more infrastructure behind it, like building the websites or, you know, the QR codes and having better, maybe some of the better materials involved. But this project, it has won National Leadership Awards too. It's been featured in 2 different books. It's been featured on blogs. It's been a model for collaboration, but we move so fast. We have a tendency like to outpace the granting opportunities because you have to write a grant a year ahead of time, right? And we don't know where our community needs are going to be that fast. So that's been a challenge that we haven't figured out how to overcome yet is the funding part. No, it's a great
No,
question.
it is.
Yeah.
It's just that educator in me.
Yeah, no, it's something we keep thinking about and we haven't nailed it down yet. Yeah.
So I got to show you guys, this evolved because we had wood in our basements and it was this dimension. Because, you know,
That's right.
yeah. And this blue, Raney had in her basement. And it happened to work out. It turned out to be a really good color and we went with it. The white ones are the white that I had in my basement from Leftover Project. This started on a shoestring and it's still on a shoestring.
Yeah.
That's great.
Sorry, pardon?
How do you make the stencil?
Yeah.
Jen?
Plastic. The first one I did, I made out of like oh God, what do you call it? Like the cardboard that boxes are made out, like cereal boxes are made out of. And that lasted, I don't know.
I still have it, but all the
Yeah.
little lines in between the waves here have
Yeah,
broken
it
down.
didn't last long.
No.
So then I got this plastic and it took me 45 minutes to cut this. If anyone has a laser cutter, come see me.
So we have 2 or 3 of the plastics now, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what we found was that we thought people would just like, we'd put together kits and people would just pick them up and install it. But we've kind of learned people wanted us to come and do it
Yeah.
with them and do it together. And that sort of being together it's what it's turned into.
So then this is spray painted, Jen spray painted, but I don't think
Yeah.
she liked it. So we just
No.
generally dab with a paintbrush.
Turn it the
takes
other way.
pretty quick. Oops, sorry. Spray
That
paint.
was spray paint. That's
Paintbrush.
paintbrush.
And so then Catherine came up with a really simple way of being able to use a line level to measure from your current high tide to predicted high tides, which takes into account the landscape that you're measuring with. And so that's been an important element as we were thinking. It's like, what does 3 feet mean? What does 1.5 feet mean? It means different things in different places. And so it's very hard to imagine what that looks like. So getting out and doing these and getting your line level out across the landscape, we did it out on Thompson Island with the students. And it was like 30 feet, as you saw in the rendering, right? But then other places, it's hardly noticeable because you're on a cliff or whatever. So that's how we sort of have been doing it. And it's been a work in progress for sure.
Sharon, do you have some online questions?
Oops, there we go. I have 2. The first one started out prefacing the question, talking about the Paris Accord in 2015 and how we are far outpacing the things that were predicted there. And then how can we reach the common man, woman who can't think that far ahead?
Ooh.
Well, we found, I didn't know this, it came to me in one of the interviews that we had from somebody from Boston who was interviewing us about the project, that she said, well, you have reached all the like NOAA's brand new standards for best practices in environmental education and engagement on climate change. They're like, did you do that on purpose? It's like, I did not know NOAA had that. No, we didn't. We live here, and this is where we are. And so what we do is based on what we see in our community as the biggest needs, or what we hear as the biggest stress points and the fear and the questions. And that's where we're directing the research. And that's why we've stayed on sea level rise for 3 years, which we did not mean to do. But, and so in terms of how you communicate that, you communicate it locally. You talk about what you see here, and we are not going to stop sea level rise on MDI. But we can work together to be resilient in the face of sea level rise. It's not just building a thing, right? You have to build in a culture of change and flexibility and movement that is going to be what is going to work. And so I think the desire is to think about all those really big, terrifying factors that you don't have any control over and then feel defeated by it. But if we learned anything from working with students, they do not think that way at all. They think about what is in their backyard and what they are watching and what they care about and the landscapes that they want to protect. And that's super inspiring.
That's
And
right.
I
And
didn't
another,
think about that.
another thing on that line is that we talk about sea level rise as the problem. Sea level rise is not the problem. The problem is that we inhabit the area that's being flooded, which is a good thing because there's nothing we can do about sea level rise, but we can move our stuff out of the way. I mean, it's not gonna be easy, but it can be done.
And people have done it before
Mhm.
in this place.
So Raney, I do want to, I recognize the time is getting away from us. So I want to just open it up a little bit about this. What can you do? And, how can we engage? Because this is clearly a really, exciting conversation. I'm happy to stay as long as all of you want to stay, but I do want to just try to touch on that a little bit before folks who have to leave at the top of the hour do that. So do you want to? We've got a little.
It looks like Karen really needs to talk.
And somebody back there is very excited.
Thank you all very much for this. Ben, my husband, and I do a lot of rowing out on the bay, and one thing that has really come to our attention is the amount of riprap. And Catherine, thank you for including that you're tracking that. But it's another opportunity to work with people who live there to, if people are willing to be part of it and volunteer their information about the riprap, and what's changing for their shore and the cost. It's enormous amount of expense, obviously, that people are putting and into the riprap, and if people are feel part of the learning and the gathering of data, that could be really transformational. The other thing is clammers and diggers, and you mentioned the low tide data. And another opportunity, which I'm sure you're all over this, but I was very inspired. And so, to get their involvement and their sense of change. So anyway, thank you all.
I think that's really great. Just to recap that for the folks online, we were just talking about the increasing instances of riprap along the coastline and sort of the inherent challenges that in and of itself creates for further erosion. So, okay, in the back.
Two things. One island-wide project that might get people's attention and would be worth doing is to focus on leaving the islands, the causeway. And I mean, that puts every person, it's not a town issue, and it's so obvious. Obviously, there are lots of other issues, but that one, if we can't get, either we gotta fix that in some way or deal with it, or we're gonna need our own boat, and it's another approach. Very, but that's, also, I'm, as a owner of a shorefront property who lost 3 feet of our shore in the winter storm, we are putting riprap up. People next door to us are doing the same. People on the other point put up riprap before the storm. So their bank was saved, but their dock was wiped out. We lost a lot of trees on our point. Also, I understand that salt water, I mean, because the water came up much higher than it would normally, so the trees that survive will probably die because they can't live, my new learning, they can't live in salt water soil. So tell me, I mean, I know that we're doing the riprap at great expense. I mean, it's ridiculous, I mean, it's a ridiculous amount of money. But we want to be able to hold the bank. What is the problem with riprap? And what is the solution? If we don't do that, the next storm will take out 3 feet. Plus this storm, at least in the area I'm talking about around Pearl Point Road and Southwest Harbor, that storm, the wind was from the southeast, which was unheard of. And so we never had an issue like this before, though obviously there's been general erosion. But anyway, that's.
Thank you. Do you want to?
So I'm gonna actually start with the solution. So the solution is, one of them, as Jen has already alluded to, is we can move our stuff out of the way. And so that is gonna be a solution for some people. But another solution is called a living shoreline. Another jargony term is nature-based solutions, which, how many of you have heard of living shorelines? Couple, you're probably going to be hearing more about them. And so if you and your neighbors had gotten together and instead of riprapping, right, because what was there before? Natural vegetation, trees. Riprap doesn't have any of that, but a living shoreline is something that's going to mimic that natural vegetation, maybe rebuild the bluff and look more at what was there before it was eroded. Living shorelines also look like a seawall. So people are building cobble berms that look a lot like what we call seawalls, which is a cobble berm that's meant to be washed over, just like a sand dune. It's meant to be moved by the waves, but in the process, it's protecting what's behind it. People are building offshore oyster reefs that help to attenuate wave action and prevent that energy. And that's something that the researchers we're working with are actually modeling what happens if we put those things there. You can change the type of vegetation that you're planting along the shoreline. And so you're still providing habitat, which riprap is habitat, but it's different maybe than what was there. And it takes a while without vegetation. Sometimes invasives can come in and fill in that riprap area. So thinking more and looking at the landscape around you is one way. I know we heard a lot in Tremont with people recognizing the role that Bass Harbor Marsh played in protecting that community from the storms, and everyone sort of recognizing that. So how can we restore and maintain Bass Harbor Marsh so that it continues to provide that protection?
And you asked like why it's a problem. It's because when your wave energy comes in, the walls don't break the energy, they just redistribute it. So that's the challenge, is to try to find solutions that are going to break the energy of the wave, not redistribute it further along either side. And then I would just say, I think that in addition to sort of thinking about living shoreline opportunities, that I just blanked on my
Which
second
are
point.
expensive also, which
Right.
are expensive, right?
Yeah.
And which you know require permits, and all of our environmental laws are not really based. They're not for trying to restore the environment, and so it gets sort of complicated, and so they're not. I don't think they're not being implemented quickly enough.
But they are possible. I mean, putting on my landscape architecture hat, you know, I've done a fair amount of what we call bioengineered shore repair, which is basically riprap with planting pockets, but done by people who know what they're doing. With like, there's ways that you can reinforce those plant pockets so that they don't get washed out constantly. But eventually the plants take over and the root systems do what they do in an unmodified system, which is the roots hold everything together.
We also want to put in there's a living seawall, which actually has
Yeah.
molded holes and cavities
Yeah.
that attach to a vertical seawall that provide habitat and places for seaweed and mussels and things to attach. So there's a lot of sort of that are also really engaging, and people love to visit these things and
Yeah.
experience them.
And the one last thing, sorry, I did remember what I was going to say, is that, you know, we can't control water. we can only control how we respond to water. And so trying to control it is a never ending battle that we're going to lose. So creating spaces where water is encouraged to come in is going to be an important solution, so that we're not just building a barrier all around us, but that we're finding those green spaces, as Catherine mentioned, in Tremont, or there's might be opportunities in Southwest Harbor to consider that directs that flow of water to allow for the inland flooding, so that those damages are not necessarily everywhere, but it's a space that is designed to be to experience that. And so so we need to be thinking creatively about that too.
Made to flood.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So one thing that does pop into mind is, resources. So if you all have some resources, examples of things that you're seeing, send them over to us, and we'll make sure that all of you who have registered tonight, we can, share that with you in the follow-up, so that you at least can explore some of that information on your own. I think that would be really helpful.
Sarah had something from Tremont Sustainability.
Yeah, go ahead.
And all of what you're talking is so exciting. So we are going to go for a grant. There's a brand new set of grants that just came available. And our goal, we're just building this, but our goal is to create a map of Tremont through solid data, and we want to use this sort of data. So I'm going to talk to you about stenciling all around everywhere, as well as GMRI and Island Institute data. And we want to create a Tremont map with overlays, but we also want to do the geological study of the shorelines, where there are erosive soils and where there are not, so that every landowner can be advised. This is your best option, knowing what's, what do you call it, uptide of you? It's not upstream of you, but downtide of you, whatever, that what you do will affect them. And these are the best ways that we can advise. So we're really excited about this. Thank you.
And I have to say, Tremont is doing amazing work. Like, if anybody here hasn't followed what Tremont is up to, or any of you guys online, go to their town website and look at their comprehensive plan, because it is a work of art.
That's great.
And just to say, so we were trying to talk about solutions.
Yeah.
What are we willing to do and what do we value? I think Sarah's point really is a perfect opportunity to dig in a little more to that, which is that all these comprehensive plans, all these towns have these documents that guide decision making. And so you as residents and voters have the opportunity to get involved in that process and say, we need more information, so that we can have a resource where we can go to learn about what are these options and alternatives as property owners, to be able to do something that is not going to be hurtful to our neighbors, but that is going to be beneficial, but also still protect and preserve what it is that we value and that we care about.
So let's just take a couple minutes and talk a little bit about how we think like an island, and maybe starting, Raney, with just a quick overview of like how these decisions are made. I know there's the League of Towns. Like, what is the process for having conversations about how to deal with replacing the access point to the island? Who makes that decision?
So, right. So that's the challenge, is that I think we all as citizens need to be able to use our voice in whatever capacity we have, to be able to pressure towns to work together more collaboratively. The League of Towns is really active, and they are working with the Musson Group to come up with an island-wide strategic plan. Mostly that's focused on sustainable growth and housing, but we can influence that and be demanding that climate change is a part of that overall consideration. And the League of Towns is not just MDI, it's also Trenton and Lemoyne, and just off the island as well, which would be able to address the issue of the bridge and the vulnerability that we have from the bridge. So that's, I think, one of the really concrete ways, and they're in the early stages of planning. So this is the perfect time to reach out and ask how you can get more involved, or to be able to say, I need this information and I need these resources, and we would love to see that come through in these planning documents.
So I'm seeing a future science cafe where we have the League of Towns represented and have this conversation. That would be great.
Do it before Derlin retires.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what else? What about, ways that folks can get involved? I just want to have folks leave with a couple of tangibles, and I'm going to just turn it over to you if you have specific ways that you want to kind of engage that conversation.
Well, I think we listed, the opportunities that we would love to see for people to get more involved with, sharing information, volunteering, being stronger advocates, for the things that you're concerned about and the changes that you want to see, or the information that you need, right? Like you need to be informed, and that's the most important piece. And then think like an island. We are 108 square miles surrounded by the sea, and the sea doesn't care.
That's great. We are all in it together.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I do recognize the time. I thank all of you for being so patient with us. It's been a really interesting topic, and I would love to maybe circle back sooner than a year. I think maybe this fall would be a really nice time to continue this conversation and figure out, what is helpful to everyone. So share your feedback with us. If you have specific ideas or questions about what you'd like to know more about, we would love to be able to facilitate that, and others too. So it would be great. And I want to just mention our next Science Cafe will be on June 23rd, and that will feature some really fascinating research, totally shifting topics here, but featuring some exciting work that's happening here at the MDI Biolab by one of our young scientist, Dr. Emily Spalding, who is studying neurodegenerative disease, and she's actually using a very tiny microscopic worm known as C. elegans to study this process. And her whole focus right now is whether or not there is a way that we can find an early detection system for diseases like ALS and other neurodegenerative disorders, so that we could potentially intervene and prevent the onset of those diseases. So I encourage you to join us for that. She is a former science teacher, and I'm telling you, she's a fantastic science communicator. So it will not be over your head. It'll be really, really an engaging conversation. So I hope you all join us. And thank you for being here this evening. Please share your ideas and thoughts with us, and we will assemble whatever resources we can and get those out to you all. So thank you so much. And thank you to you all for the great work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.